Today we're going to talk about wireframing, and particularly about sketching, which is a very simple way of putting your ideas on paper. Every user experience designer would do that in order to understand how well their ideas are suited towards the real use. So let me start by explaining to you how the process works. We would sketch something first, and we could do it either on a piece of paper or a wall like this, and then we would wireframe it with more fidelity. By the time it's wireframed, it would look almost like a finished thing. Then if we have time, we would prototype it. On a prototype, it's like a wireframe that you can actually play with, that is interactive. We're not going to be doing any prototyping today, but I'll talk to you about sketching and I'll explain how we wireframe things so they are most effective. Imagine that together with your team you want to build a food tracker app, an application, a mobile app that will allow people to log in just information about what they eat every day. It might be for health purposes or anything else. Thinking of this process, you need to consider a couple of things. You need to be mindful of what these people that are going to be using the app might want to do, and think of some typical users of the application. Are they going to be doing it while they're using it at home? Are they going to be using it on the run, at work, from their mobile, from their desktop? What is it going to be like? You need to know these things because the context will inform the behavior of the application. So the easy way of going about this is if you first concentrate on drawing the storyboard. I will explain it to you in a minute what a storyboard is and how it works. Once you have that from the storyboard, you can go to rough sketches of your interfaces, and from there potentially to a digital wireframe if you have time for that. Once this is done, you would be able to show the product of your work to real users, to your customers, to people who might be using the app, and you would ask them whether this particular choice of controls and interfaces works for them in the context of what they might want to do. If you have an idea for a digital product, you can start by storyboarding the story of the user who uses the product in a specific way. Now, when you think of storyboards, consider all these movies that you have seen of marketing professionals showing little comic strip-like stories of what's going to happen in the TV ad. I'm sure you remember those. The whole point is to be able to draw a story of somebody using your app or a website, so you can then provide them with right interfaces in context of what they might want to do. Now, the way to start with storyboards is just by sketching the storyboard template itself. I'll show you how we can do it. You can start with a storyboard in any way you like, but the whole point to it is that it would show the number of steps that a person is going through while using a product. So the easiest way of doing it is to start with sketching little frames first. Consider that each one of these frames is an actual step in the user journey. Now, I have 3 frames here, but of course a storyboard can be much longer or it could be shorter. It just depends on what kind of application do you use. And the whole point to it is to be able to outline what happens at various stages of this journey. So first we would try sketching out what happens to the person who's doing it. Imagine that we have a person named Joe, and Joe wants to log some food into that food tracker app that we are thinking of building. So we might start with Joe having his breakfast, and that could be a very scruffy drawing of somebody sitting with a bowl of cereal. Now, yeah, that is Joe, and he's also got his mobile in his hand while eating at the same time. We would describe it as well underneath the frame so we know what's going on. So Joe's having his breakfast. He's reading some news from his phone. Now imagine that the next thing he might want to do is to log information about the breakfast that he just had into the app. So here we could sketch the phone screen itself with Joe's hand pointing at the image. And we could say, now he'd like to log in information about the food. The next thing he might want to do is to pick a date when he had his breakfast. So in order to do that, you would draw a little calendar that Joe could be picking his information from. And you would say, Joe uses the built-in calendar to pick a date. And you would continue like this. Obviously, you can imagine that I could stand here forever sketching various steps of this journey. But the whole point is to be able to outline what does happen to your main character and how they utilize the app or the website that you build. Okay, so this is our little storyboard. And imagine that obviously it is much longer than this one that I have behind me. When you have this, the next stage from there is to quickly talk about it with your colleagues in the team and potentially some other people that might be using the end product. You want to find out whether these steps make sense to them and whether this is something that they would roughly do logging the food into the food tracker app. Once you have that, once this is established, you can actually proceed to sketching interfaces of your application, which we would do in the form of very simple sketches. The first thing that you need to do when you want to sketch an interface out is to think of the requirements. What do you want to have on it? If it's a website, what kind of elements would it have on the page? If it's a mobile app, what kind of buttons, controls, text boxes would you want it to show to the user? Once you have that idea, you can start by doing something very scruffy. A sketch should ideally be very, very simple, because the concept is that you would do it and then potentially throw it away immediately if it's not good enough. So don't go into sketching with rulers or beautiful colors. You really don't have to do that. All you need to do is to have a pen, and a black pen would do, or anything like that, a Sharpie if you fancy, and then you can basically attempt the first sketch. Once you have a pen in your hand, all you have to do is to start sketching. So the easiest way to do it is by sketching the boundaries of your screen. Consider that we want to sketch a mobile app. That means that our screen would be most likely quite tall. Let's start with something like this. You don't have to be perfect about this. Notice how I'm getting outside of the boundaries here. That's absolutely fine. And remember, if you want to wipe something or remove something, just do it. Don't worry about it much. It needs to be quite scruffy because it might be thrown away at any time. The next step from there would be to roughly outline what do you need on your screen. Consider that we might be building a food tracker app, something that would allow us to track what we eat, what an interface like this might have. It might be that we would need to have some kind of a picture that would show us what the food looks like. And then maybe what we want to do is to name it with a text box, to write what's the food like. And then maybe a date picker to choose the date when we ate it. Potentially also the time. And a button to submit information. Putting this on paper is really important because you won't remember about everything once you are actually sketching. So having a list like this would put you ahead and it would really make the work much relaxed. So then go back to your screen and think about the layout of it. Well, let's say that we want to have a photograph of something that we've had. And the natural way for mobile apps to work is that you either take a photograph with a camera or you are picking it up from a library. So make a little symbol of plus to indicate that this would be something that the user could click on to choose a photograph or to take a new one. Then we need the name of the dish. So why don't we have a little title first of what have you eaten? And a little text box to write the name of the dish. All we then need is a date. You can just visualize it by putting a little calendar symbol on, and maybe the time when you've had it. And the time could be simply another text box. And the final thing that you would most likely need on that screen is some kind of a save button, just to make sure that information is saved there. Now this is very simple and it looks pretty lame actually, but you can imagine that if you show something like this to one of your real users or even your colleague, they will be able to tell you whether roughly it makes sense to them. That's why we're doing sketching and that's why we're doing wireframing. Visualizing these things really helps us understand how the real interface would work without spending much time on doing the actual design work before we are ready. Once you have this, you might be asking yourself, Why do we even do this? This doesn't really look anything like a real mobile app, does it? The whole point to it is that you can visualize ideas that you have, and you can also show that visualization to others, so they can give you honest feedback on what does it look like and whether it would work for them or not. And when asking for that feedback, you need to ask them open-ended questions, such as, how would this work for you? How does it come across to you? Instead of prompting them to give you an answer that you would like hearing. Remember that this is a methodology for quick and dirty sketching. Therefore, it might happen, and most likely it will happen, that you'll have to sketch it few times before you arrive at the version that would be working for your end user and for your team. You have seen me sketching things on a whiteboard, but you don't need a whiteboard to do this. All you need to have is a piece of paper, and it could be either a plain paper or one of those templates that you can download from the internet, like the one that I have here that is showing me the outline of an iPhone. And once you have that, get a pen and start sketching. You'll immediately notice that this is much better because it gives you way more precision. And that's it. You could of course put a couple of screens one after another. And when you have that, you can start showing it to people, to users of the real product, so they could tell you whether it makes sense to them or not. Once you have your drawings and your sketches of your wireframe, you can actually do something similar using a computer. It would help you testing it with other people. Now, there are so many tools that could help you doing this. I am using the free tool of wireframe.cc. You don't need to pay to use that, and no registration is necessary. When doing this, all you need to remember is that it's very similar to drawing it on paper. So let's give our application a title of Food Tracker. And then let's make a drawing of a picture. A little label that we've had on our paper prototypes. From there, we can actually go into adding an input field. And then another label for date. And a small control that would remind us of a date picker, and then a label for time, and just an input that would allow us to enter the time. In fact, as you can see, you can actually use a proper input in here, so let's do that again. Okay, and from here all we need is a button, so let's add one with a label of save. And that's us done. Your wireframe is complete and you can start showing it to others. The easiest way to do that is if you click the save button. This will generate a link that you can later use to show your design to others using a web browser. It's as easy as this. Good luck testing your designs. Now you should have your storyboard and you should have your wireframes and perhaps even your digital prototype or a wireframe. And if you have that, you are ready to start showing it to people and to ask them questions about whether that would work for them or not. And after that, all you need to do is to refine your ideas, maybe sketch them again, maybe test them once again, and you're ready to go. Hopefully this helped you in some way. Have a good time and enjoy the rest of the hackathon. Thank you.